Okay, so we're going to talk about the brain, and the brain is made up of two cerebral hemispheres. So we have a left and right hemisphere. So here is the right cerebrum, and if you'll notice that there are convolutions that kind of look like worms. And these stick up, and these convolutions are referred to as gyri. In between the convolutions, we have shallow grooves. The grooves are referred to as sulci. If we look at the lobes of the cerebrum, we have our frontal lobe, our parietal lobe, our occipital lobe, and our temporal lobe. There is a fifth lobe that is available on some of the models, which you can see right in here. That fifth lobe is referred to as the insula. Now, when we look at the brain, we can see that there is a very deep groove that runs coronally right here. That deep groove is referred to as the central sulcus. The gyrus in front of the central sulcus is the precentral gyrus. The gyrus behind the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus. There is a large crack or fissure that separates the cerebral hemispheres. This is referred to as the longitudinal fissure. There is a deep groove that separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. That is the lateral sulcus. If we separate the cerebral hemispheres and look at the cerebellum that is inferior to the cerebral hemispheres and posterior, when we look at the cerebellum, we notice that there is white matter in the shape of a tree. This is the arbor vitae. It means tree of life. When we look at the brain stem, from where my stick is upward is considered the portion of the brainstem that we call the midbrain. The midbrain can also be referred to as the mesencephalon. Inferior to the midbrain, we have the pons. Inferior to the pons, we have the medulla oblongata. You'll notice that posterior to the midbrain, we have two little lumps which are part of a structure called the corpora quadrigemina. The superior portion is the superior colliculi, which is associated with the eyes. The inferior portion makes up the inferior colliculi, which is associated with the ears. You'll notice a large structure of white matter. This is the corpus callosum, which connects both halves of the cerebral hemispheres together. Another connecting structure, which is the inferior part of the corpus callosum, is the fornix, which is this beige structure below here. The thalamus is found in here. It's part of the diencephalon. And in the middle of the thalamus, we have the intermediate mass, which is also known as the interthalamic adhesion. It's this dark brown spot. Below the thalamus, we have the hypothalamus. There is a little gland down below the hypothalamus This gland is the pituitary gland, which is also called the hypophysis. The pituitary gland is connected to the hypophysis by means of a stalk. That stalk is called the infundibulum. Even though this term is not on your lab list, you'll learn it in A&P 2. If we look posterior to the pituitary gland, we see this round structure here. This is the mammillary body. There are two mammillary bodies, one on each side. Those are important for things like licking, chewing, and sucking, and swallowing. Over here we have the pineal gland. It's number 23. It's this little gland right here. The pineal gland produces melatonin, which helps regulate sleep and wake cycles, as well as starts the onset of puberty. If you look at this pink structure here, that is the choroid plexus, and the choroid plexus is one of those structures that's responsible for producing cerebrospinal fluid. As blood flows through the tiny little capillaries, it will filter out to become the potential cerebrospinal fluid. If we turn the brain over, we see that there are our cranial nerves. We have the olfactory bulb and the olfactory tract. Remember that the olfactory bulb is receiving nerves through the nose. Those are the olfactory nerves. So the olfactory nerves join the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory bulb has axons that become the olfactory tract. This next large structure here is part of the optic nerve that would be coming from the eyeballs. The optic nerve is going to cross at a structure referred to as the optic chiasm, or optic chiasma. You can see crossing here with the optic chiasma. After the optic nerve crosses, the remaining portion of those axons is referred to as the optic tract. Again, this is our little pituitary gland. Our olfactory nerve is cranial nerve 1. Our optic nerve is cranial nerve 2. Now I'm going to switch. This guy's intact. Okay, so right here we have cranial nerve 3. Cranial nerve 3 is the oculomotor nerve. Then we have cranial nerve 4. Cranial nerve 4 is your trochlear nerve. Here's cranial nerve 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. From cranial nerve 5, we actually have cranial nerve 6 here. That's the abducens nerve. Cranial nerve 7, which is facial. Cranial nerve 8, which is vestibulocochlear. Here's cranial nerve 9, which is your hypoglossal nerve. I'm sorry, 9 is glossopharyngeal. So we've got glossopharyngeal, and then we have cranial nerve 10, which is your vagus nerve. We have cranial nerve 11, which is the accessory nerve. And then this guy right here, as well as over here, is cranial nerve 12. That is your accessory nerve. Okay, so again we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. Those are the cranial nerves. Next, we're going to look at the ventricles of the brain. The ventricles of the brain include the lateral ventricles The lateral ventricles are connected to the third ventricle by a structure called the interventricular foramen. There are two, so together they are interventricular foramina, leading from the lateral ventricles to this structure right here, which is the third ventricle. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle by means of the cerebral aqueduct. The cerebral aqueduct is that tunnel that carries cerebral spinal fluid to the fourth ventricle. And you can see the associated choroid plexus for the fourth ventricle, third ventricle, and if we turn this upside down, you can see the choroid plexus for the lateral ventricles on the inferior aspect of that structure. Now if we look at this model, we can see the superior sagittal sinus. We can also see the choroid plexus here. It's actually in blue with red. This would be the corpus callosum. This would be the fornix. Here's your thalamus, the intermediate mass or interthalamic adhesion. Here's your pineal gland. This is the pituitary gland. This is the optic nerve. Here's your midbrain, your pons, your medulla oblongata. This is the superior colliculus, inferior colliculus. Remember, colliculi is plural, colliculus is singular. This is the cerebellum with the arbor vitae. And I think I did the hypothalamus with the pituitary gland. And I think I've got them all. I might have missed one or two.